In the previous class, we discussed the nature of proposition and the traditional classification of the proposition. I think you have understood the topic very clearly. The traditional classification of proposition, the fourfold classification of proposition, you have understood very clearly. Then now today we are going to take up a new topic, distribution of terms. What is distribution of terms? A term is said to be distributed when it is taken in its entire denotation. अखोइना term अमखक distribute तौरे हाइदना लौगदोइसे distribution tauba distribution of terms and hairisi kainobu term dugi meaning duna magi entire denotation du mean taubu itaragadi term du distribute taure haina khone logane entire denotation du mean tauba haibadi kainobu magi term duna piriba magi meaning duna kanglup amabu loinamak mahut chinba ngamba meaning amakak thuaba ado regadi term du distribute taure haina logane. Then what is term then? Now let me tell you again. A term is said to be distributed when it is taken in its entire denotation, and it is undistributed when only a part of its denotation is taken into consideration. Only a part of the denotation is taken into consideration, then the term is said to be undistributed. Thus, by distribution of a term, we mean taking it universally or referring to all parts of it. Adunadi, akoina haujik nainariba saruksidagi akoina what is the distribution of terms habasi akoina khamangame. Amuka haige distribution of terms habadi karino harekanda term aduna piriba magi meaning aduna term dugi meaning duna mapung oiba akoina term dugi term dun mohchelibu khuding maktubu meaning dugi mapung oiba khuding maktubu loina maktubu represent tawanga maba adu khuding maktubu mean tawanga maba adu oregadi term du kedoragebu madu distribution tawraba haina khona loganeba distribute tawre haina loganeba. A term is said to be distributed when it is taken in its entire denotation, and it is undistributed when only a part of its denotation is taken into consideration. This is what we call, this is the answer of the question, what is distribution of terms? Now let us examine the fourfold classification of the proposition A, E, I, O, and determine which terms are distributed in them. Ekoi hojik mamang de nagiba fourfold classification of proposition koina kari hana khangnaba A, E, I, O hana khangnaba madugi proposition classification of proposition de koi ne raga yengsi aduga karam tambu distribute tawi natraga tawdi de koi lep thokse. Let us now examine the fourfold classification of the proposition A, E, I, O and determine which terms are distributed or which terms are not distributed. Now let us see, first of all, let us take up the A proposition. An A proposition or a universal affirmative proposition is of the form all S is P or all men are mortal. Akoina A proposition natraga koina universal affirmative proposition haidana खनबसिंग मसिकी फॉर्म जी कइनो हारगदी all s is p हाइबसिने all s is p हाइबदी all men are mortal हाइब माने all men are mortal. This is the a preposition, and in case of this form of the a preposition, what we find is that it is very clear, it is quite clear that the subject term is taken in its entire extent. Let us see the subject term. In case of the preposition, all men are mortal. All men are mortal haiba masigi preposition sida subject term all men je khoi yengase. In case of in connection with the subject term all men, what we find is that the subject term is taken in its entire extent. Taken in its entire extent, what we mean is that all men represents, all men indicates, this subject term indicates all men. It represents all men. Therefore, the subject term is said to be distributed. The subject term is distributed in connection with the a preposition, all men are mortal. The subject term, all men, is distributed. But let us see, in case of the predicate term, when we look at the predicate term, there is no explicit reference to the full denotation of the predicate. Predicate term se amuk yengba matamdadi kaidawi. When we look at the predicate term, what we find is that predicate term sina magi full meaning asi explicitly maduda pande. Reference tawde explicitly. Magi mapung oiba meaning du madu magi meaning si mapung oina madu meaning du gi chap chaba magi wahan thok si piba ngamde. There is no explicit reference to the full denotation of the predicate. Therefore, when we study, when we analyze, when we examine the a preposition, all men are mortal, what we find is that the subject term is distributed, but the predicate term is undistributed. This is the thing what we find, and this is the conclusion we can draw from the discussion. Then let us examine E preposition, universal negative preposition. An E preposition or a universal negative preposition. An E preposition form is of the form no SSP. No SSP is the form of the E preposition. Say no men are perfect. No men are perfect. No men are perfect is the example, is the form of the E preposition, is a universal negative preposition. Now let us see the subject term and the predicate term. The subject term is no man and the predicate term is perfect. No men are perfect haiba example sida no man haiba sina subject term ni, man di subject term ni, aduga perfect sina predicate term. No men are perfect haibase akoina sumana symbolically sumana haibasu yai no S is P. And in this case, what we find is that both the subject and the predicate are taken in their entire extent. We can see, we understand very clearly that the subject term men represents all men, and therefore it is to be said that the subject term is taken in its entire extent. On the other hand, when we examine the predicate term perfect, when we see the meaning, no S is P, no P is S, also we can say. No perfect being is meant, are meant. No perfect beings are meant. What I mean is that perfect, the predicate term perfect also are also taken in their entire extent. Therefore, from the above example, from the above analysis, what we see is that the classes man and a perfect being absolutely exclude each other. Say, no man, the predicate, the subject term no man and the predicate term perfect exclude each other. They exclude each other. They exclude each other. Both the subject and the predicate are taken in their entire extent. Therefore, after we examine the example of the E preposition, what we see is that in an E preposition, both the subject and the predicate are distributed. This is the conclusion. What we see is that in an E preposition, both the subject and the predicate are distributed. Then let us take up I preposition. When we analyze the I preposition, let us see what we find. An I preposition or particular affirmative preposition is of the form some S is P. Is of the form some S is P. Some S is P is the form of the I preposition. This is the symbolic representation of some men are intelligent, we can say. Say some men are intelligent. This is the example of this is the form of the I preposition. Some men are intelligent. Some men, the subject term, and intelligent is the predicate term. When we observe the subject term, it is clearly understood that the subject term is in its partial extent. It does not indicate all men, it indicates only a few men. Therefore, the subject term is not distributed. And again, let us see the predicate term intelligent. When we examine the predicate term intelligent, again what we see is that it does not indicate, it does not clearly, explicitly, it does not explicitly mention its meaning. Its quantity is not explicitly stated. When we observe or when we analyze the predicate term intelligent, what we see is that its quantity, the quantity of the intelligent is not explicitly stated. So, from the observation, when we examined the I preposition, both the subject and the predicate term are in their partial extent. They do not indicate the meanings in their entire extent. So far as the predicate is concerned, we find its quantity is not clearly stated, we have seen. Thus, from the discussion, from the observation, both the subject term and the predicate term, what we can go to the conclusion is that in an I preposition, neither the subject nor the predicate is distributed. This is the conclusion. In an I preposition, neither the subject nor the predicate is distributed. Then lastly, let us examine O proposition. An O proposition or a particular negative proposition, when we discuss this fourth classification of proposition, the recent classification of proposition, fourth classification in connection with the distribution of terms, let us see what we can find from the discussion. O proposition or a particular negative proposition is of the form some S is not B, or some men are not honest. Some men are not honest. This is the form of the O proposition. Or symbolically, we can say some S is not B. When we examine the subject term, we clearly understand. We can clearly understand that the subject term some men represents only a few persons. It does not indicate its meaning in its entire extent. In case of the O proposition, when we examine the subject term, it is clearly understood that some men indicates only a few persons. And when we discuss about its denotation, what we see is that it indicates the meaning in, it does not indicate the meaning in its entire extent. It does not indicate the meaning in its entire extent when we discuss the subject term. ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯃꯁꯤꯒꯤ subject termꯁꯤ some men are not honest ꯍꯥꯏꯕ O propositionꯒꯤ example, O propositionꯒꯤ form masigi sinay matamda some men haibasina taisi ekona yam clearly ekona khama ngami madudi some men haibasi masina kari warage bu masina represent tawrisi few person katamak represent tawe mana mapung phaba mi kudimak tu masina represent tawba adu makhalgi tam khok oiba ngamde aduna when we observe, when we analyze the subject term some men, what we find is that the subject term is not distributed because it does not indicate the meaning in its entire extent. It indicates a partial extent. Then let us go to the predicate term. When we look at the predicate term, let us see what we find. We find that this predicate term is distributed. In a negative proposition, the predicate term is denied of the subject. Some men are not honest haiba proposition sida some men haiba predicate subject term jibu mapu phana denied to basi predicate term jina oye. The predicate term, the predicate is denied of the subject. The predicate is denied of the entire subject, the whole subject. Therefore, after observing this situation, what we see is that the predicate term indicates the meaning in its entire extent. Therefore, the predicate term is distributed. Thus, in the conclusion, what we see is that in an O proposition, the subject is undistributed, but the predicate is distributed. Hence, in a summary, what we see is that A distributes subject only, E distributes both subject and a predicate, I distributes neither subject nor predicate, O distributes predicate only. Asum haina ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯉꯁꯤꯒꯤ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁꯁꯤꯗ ꯅꯩꯅꯈꯤꯕ ꯑꯗꯨ ꯌꯦꯡꯉꯀꯥꯟꯗ ꯑꯩꯈꯣꯏꯅ ꯐꯣꯜ ꯀ꯭ꯂꯥꯁꯤꯐꯤꯀꯦꯁꯟꯗ ꯂꯩꯔꯤꯕ ꯃꯥꯒꯤ ꯇꯥꯝꯁꯤꯡꯗꯨ ꯅꯩꯅꯔꯛꯄ ꯃꯇꯝꯗ A proportionꯗ ꯀꯔꯤ ꯐꯪꯒꯦꯕꯨ ꯁꯕꯖꯦꯛꯁꯤꯗꯃꯛ ꯗꯤꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯇꯧꯋꯤ. E proportionꯗ ꯀꯔꯤ ꯐꯪꯉꯤ? E proportionꯗ ꯗꯤꯁꯇ꯭ꯔꯤꯕ꯭ꯌꯨꯠ ꯇꯧꯔꯤꯁꯤ both subject and predicate. E proportion ꯍꯥꯏꯕꯗꯤ universal negative proportion. Universal negative proportion haiba E proportion sitadi both the subject and the predicate are distributed. Asi phange. I proportion di particular affirmative proportion adu koina I proportion hani kawi. I proportion sitadi kaidawi akoina naina matamda akoina phangi se subject su predicate su animak distribute na tawde. I distributes neither the subject nor predicate. O proportion, particular negative proportion, last proportion. O proportion da dia koina phangisi predicate amak distribute tawi aduga subject ti distribute tawde. Asum haina ekoi gi nainaba distribution of terms ki magi what is the distribution of terms amasung tongan ba four classification of proportion da ninagadabadu ekoina khangma ngame. Let us see the summary of today's class, distribution of terms. Distribution of terms. What is distribution of terms? A term is said to be distributed when it is taken in its entire denotation, and it is undistributed when only a part of its denotation is taken into consideration. Thus, by distribution of a term, we mean taking it universally or referring to all parts of it. Then let us examine the fourfold classification of the propositions. First of all, let us take up A proposition. An A proposition or a universal affirmative proposition is of the form all S is P, all men are mortal. In case of the A proposition, the subject term is distributed but the predicate term is undistributed. Then let us see E proposition. An E proposition or a universal negative proposition is of the form no S is P, no men are perfect. In this case, both the subject and the predicate are taken in their entire extent. Thus, in an E proposition, both the subject and the predicate are distributed. Then let us take up I proposition. An I proposition or a particular affirmative proposition is of the form some S is P, some men are intelligent. In this case, the subject, some men, is clearly understood in its partial extent, and so far as the predicate is concerned, so far as the predicate, the intelligent is the predicate of the proposition some men are intelligent. We find its quantity is not explicitly stated. Thus, in an I proposition, what we find is that neither the subject nor predicate is distributed. Then lastly, O proposition. An O proposition or a particular negative proposition is of the form some S is not P, some men are not honest. In this case, the subject is clearly understood that it is undistributed. When we look at the predicate, we find that the predicate is denied of the entire subject. Proposition we have examined is O proposition, and O proposition or a particular negative proposition is of the form some S is not P, some men are not honest. In this case, the subject is clearly understood that it is undistributed. When we look at the predicate, we find that the predicate is denied of the entire subject. Thus, in an O proposition, the subject is undistributed, but the predicate is distributed. Let us see the summary. A distributes subject only. E distributes both subject and predicate. I distribute neither the subject nor predicate. And O distribute predicate only. This is what we discuss in today's class.